Hello and welcome back to Nerds App. If you're a regular viewer of mine, you might notice that we're in a slightly different environment today, and that's because I'm out in my camper van where we're going to be installing a 5G antenna up on the roof. Now, some of you might be wondering, why go through all the effort and cost of installing an external 5G antenna on a camper van when you could just use your mobile phone? And the reason for me is signal. So we found ourselves in a position quite a few times where we park up, and then when we get our phones out, sat inside the van, we have no signal at all. But if we step outside the van with our phones, take a couple of paces, we do get a signal. And to me, that suggests that just all the metal that's around us in the camper van is blocking that signal from getting to us. So the solution is typically to install an external antenna on the roof, bring that signal inside to a router, and then repeat it with Wi-Fi, and then hopefully we won't find ourselves in that situation again. Now, in terms of hardware, I've opted for the Motorhome WiFi 5G Pro Kit, which is Motorhome Wi-Fi's top of the range option and comes in at quite a hefty £650 if you buy it from their website. However, I did manage to bag one brand new and sealed from eBay for £340, so I think I've got myself a bit of a bargain there. I'll do an unboxing for you so you can see absolutely everything that's in the kit, and we'll do the installation, and then I'll do some testing at the end of the video and we can see if it was all worth it. So let's get to it. So in the box we have the antenna itself. I went for the black version that has the cables sort of hardwired in there on this threaded piece here, which you attach this bolt to. It has some 3M self-adhesive on there, and it also has this rubber skirt as well around the edge to hopefully create a nice weatherproof seal. This is the bolt that will go through the van roof. This is 70mm. You can buy an extension on this, but hopefully I won't be needing that. And then here is the nut that you screw up onto there to hold that nice and tight against the roof, and then that comes with 3 screws as well there when you can fasten those in. Also in the box we get this Wi-Fi hub, and this is where you run the antenna into, and then from there you run that into the router. That's a magnet on the front, so the router, which I'll show you in a minute, mounts onto the front there, and then you can also have power to your router because we have a 12 volt in here. And they're the mounting screws that came with the hub. Here's the 12 volt cable that goes into that. So you've got that standard connection one end, and then your sort of bare wires at the other end, which will wire into the van. Here's the router. So this is the 5G router. It's got a USB port there, which is will be wired into that hub. These are where the antenna go into. You've got the power button and the SIM card slot. It did come with a SIM pin as well to put that in and out. So that just mounts onto there nicely. And then also we got the instruction manuals, so one for installing the antenna and one that's just a general guide about setting up the Wi-Fi as well. So I'll just do a little mock-up of how all this should be connected together. So these wires will go through this bolt here, and that should be threaded on the inside, so you can screw that onto there. That goes through a hole on the roof where the wire comes through, and then you can put that over the wire and secure that up over there, which will pull it tight to the roof. As I mentioned, you've got the 3 screws. So as for wiring, this is really simple. So we've got this hub here. You can put these 2 wires into the hub. Suddenly, it doesn't really matter which way round they go. So they go into there, that's 1. That's 2. And then on the router, all we do is we take these little covers off. And as I say, it doesn't matter which way around these go, but we might as well put them that way around so the cables aren't twisted. That then docks onto here with magnet. I have a USB-C cable here, which is placed just in the right location for the USB-C port on the router itself. And then, as I say, you've got this 12 volt cable which you'll plug into here. That powers the hub, which in turn powers the router. And that's pretty much it for how it's wired in. Let's go and do it in the van. So I'm just out in the van now, scoping the best place to install the antenna on the roof. The recommendation from Motorhome WiFi is to Put the antenna above a cupboard, so in my case that'll be this one, and then you can run it into the cupboard and it's all nice and neat with everything hidden away. Now, I've decided against this because, for me, unless I wanted to take all of these cupboards out in order to pull the roof down, I'd have to come straight through this board here, and I don't know what's behind there. We'll need to drill quite a big hole, and I don't want to risk going through anything. The main reason I'm not doing it though is because the panel on the roof above this isn't flat, so I don't think we get a true seal around that antenna, because as we get towards the front of my van, it's a Ford Transit Custom, it curves, and I don't think we'll be able to sit that antenna flush against the roof and get a proper seal unless I completely filled it with silicone or something like that. So what I've opted for instead is to install it right at the back of the van on the central panel, so it's nice and symmetrical, as this panel is one of the flattest on the van. It sits nice and flush against there. And also, because we're right at the back, it means I can just undo the roof board here, get underneath it quite easily without having to take the whole thing down, and then when we bring that through I can see exactly what I'm drilling through, and I can put the nut under here, and the idea is to run the cable along up here and down and have the router sat somewhere around here. So there's a slight change of plan. We can't install it here because inside, where it would come through, will be flush against this bit here that sticks out, which wouldn't give us enough room to push that up. So instead, I'm going to install it over there just between the solar panel and the roof rack, because we've had a feel down there and there's no obstructions. If we just look up here, it's will be a little bit tight, but there is plenty of room to install it there, and the cables will come through a little bit close to my cupboard as well, so hopefully that'll be a slightly neater finish. So the first thing we did is wedged a couple of blocks of wood between the ceiling and the roof just to give us easier access, and then we marked a pilot hole and drilled it with a very small drill bit. Apologies for the camera angle here, but you'll see it a bit clearer a bit later. Once we had that, we measured the width of the bolt, as we decided to use a step drill bit, as we wanted to take our time creating the big hole on my van roof. And we marked it off so we knew when to stop. We just took our time here, gradually built the hole bigger and bigger, testing a bolt as we went along, and then eventually it fit nice and flush through there. Then we cut the bolt down to size as there was way too much sticking through the roof, and just tidied it up with a file. Then we just tested it by running a nut over it to make sure the thread was okay both ends. Then we used a couple of things to tidy up the hole inside and out just to make sure it was a really clean cut and there were no loose shards. And we also used a Dremel along the inside just to make sure there was no burr, so we could make sure that that nut and washer sit nice and flush against the roof when we tightened it up. We then used a bit of rubbing alcohol to make sure the area was all clean, as that would help us get the best seal later on. And just for peace of mind, we used a bit of outdoor graded enamel to cover the bare metal where we created the hole, just so there was zero chance of any rust forming if water was to get in. Now this step isn't 100% necessary. It does say in the instruction manual that you don't need to apply silicone, but we did anyway just because I really don't want this to leak. I then carefully threaded the wire through, trying not to get any silicone on it, and then it was time for the moment of truth. The instruction manual does say once you stick the antenna down using the self-adhesive on the back, you're unlikely to be able to remove it, so I just took my time and got this right. I held this down for a good 20 seconds just to make sure it was properly stuck. And and this is how much thread we had to play with on the inside. Then for good measure, we applied a good dollop of silicone to the nut and screwed it into place. I didn't manage to get that bit on camera, it was a bit fiddly, but I'm sure you can imagine. So as the cable is going to be sat at a 90-degree angle with the roof board pushing up against it, I used one of these PVC inspection elbows just to take some of the strain off it. Access was a little bit awkward, so we ended up taping the antenna wires and pulling it through, which worked an absolute treat. Right, so that's the antenna installed on the roof. As you can see, the cable's coming through here. What I'm thinking of doing next is just running that into the top of this cupboard. There's just a gap up there, so we need to do any drilling. Run it along the back of here and out here, and usually there's a board that sits between where these wires are and this cupboard here, and I'll fix the hub onto there and we can run the cables into it. This is the board, so this is how it'll sit on there, and it means I can have it in the cupboard and we've not had to drill through the top here, which is something I wanted to avoid as it's difficult to get to, and it wasn't flat on the roof as I said before. So the other thing we need to do is we need to get power to it. So there is a DC in port on this hub, and it's supplied with this cable. So we need to get the bare end of this wire into 12 volts. I think it only draws around 1 amp. So what I'm planning on doing is splicing into these cables here, which run back to this switch, so it means we can turn it off if we need to. When we turn this off, it'll just turn off these USB ports and turn off the hub. That's got a 10 amp fuse in there, which is obviously more than sufficient, but what I'm going to do just as a precaution is just install an inline fuse as well just before the hub, and I'll probably put a 2 amp fuse in there just as a precaution. Right, let's see how that goes. So I'm certainly no electrician, but I just took my time here and just made sure that everything was nice and secure. I used a combination of standard electrical blocks and crimps depending on the size of the cables and how many I needed to splice together. I just made sure that I tested everything as I went along, and as I say, just took my time. So here's that 2 amp fuse that I mentioned earlier, and as you can see, we have success. So it might not look very pretty, but that's all the wiring done. Can never have too much tape, right? And this DC cable for the hub is running via this inline fuse as well, which I've got a 2 amp fuse in there. So now I just need to tidy all that back up and get the hub put in the cupboard. Right, so here's the finished product installed nice and tucked away in this cupboard here, which I just need to put the door back on. I've got access to the power switch for the hub underneath there, and I've left myself access to the inline fuse as well, just in case I ever need to change that out. I'm pretty pleased with how it's turned out because it's completely hidden and you can't see where the wire's coming in either, so that's just tucked nicely behind there. So all that's left to do now is just have a bit of a tidy up of my tools, take the van out for a ride and see if it was worth the money and all the effort. Let's go. Right, so we've arrived at the first spot where I'm going to do a little bit of testing. It's relatively remote, although we are still by a main road. We'll have to see what the signal's like, or lack of. So for the testing method, what I'm going to do is basically put an EE prepaid 5G SIM card into my phone, run a speed test from within inside the van with all the doors closed, then swap the same SIM card to make sure it's fair into the router, connect my phone to that, run a speed test, and we can see if it's any better. Probably going to test it out in 3 or 4 areas just to get a decent sample of data, and we can have a look at that data at the end and I'll give you my final thoughts on the whole setup. Let's go. Right, so here goes the first test. We have a 4G signal, looks like a pretty good one, from inside the van with the door shut. Let's see how we do. So we've got a pretty good download speed there. I think we might struggle to beat that, but we'll see. And the upload speed looks decent as well. So the SIM card is now in the router, and I've connected my phone to the router using the Wi-Fi. So we're using the exact same SIM card on the exact same network, and my phone's in the same place as it was before. Let's see how it goes. We do actually have a slight improvement there. That surprised me. Not as good on the upload at the minute though. So a faster download and a much slower upload. Interesting. So we have arrived at the second spot. This one's way out of town, but it looks like we've still got a 4G signal. So first, the SIM card's back on the phone, and let's do a test from inside the van. Still pretty good. Right, let's test the router. Wi-Fi is on. Let's go. It's not looking good. So in this situation, it looks like we've actually got much worse connectivity. There you go, completely failed. Much worse connectivity from the antenna on the roof, which is shocking. Let's go and see if we can work out why. So this might have something to do with line of sight, because where the antenna's pointing, I'm parked under a tree, and there's a tree over there. So it's a pretty niche scenario, but in this situation, we'd definitely be better off just using our phone. So I'm just running a second speed test, and we have actually got some connection here, which is 10 meg, so that would be plenty to be streaming, but obviously significantly lower than just using the phone, which is really interesting. Right, so I just had a moment of realisation during the last test that I've not seen either my phone or the router connect to 5G yet, only 4G. And I thought maybe it's to do with the areas that I'm in, but actually looking at this prepaid SIM, I can't actually see any mention of 5G on there. It just mentions 4G. I just assumed it would be 5G. So what I'm going to do now is switch over to a different SIM card that I have, which is on Lebara, which uses the Vodafone UK network, which definitely does have 5G, and we'll see if we can spot any significant differences there. So we've arrived at location number 3. We are getting really remote now. There's hardly anything else around here. So we've got the Lebara SIM card in the phone. It's connected still on 4G. Let's see how that does. It's actually halfway through the speed test. Switched itself over to 5G. We're seeing a download speed of 48.7 meg. And a half decent upload speed as well. This is probably one of those situations where I wouldn't actually need to use the router, but let's put the SIM card in there and see what happens. The Lebara SIM is now in the router and the Wi-Fi is connected. Wow. So that is impressive, almost 4 times faster when connected to, I'm assuming 5G, that has to be 5G. I think the upload speed's slightly lower, but I'll take download over upload any day. Okay, that's looking better. Right, so I've got no idea where I am this time. I've literally just turned and turned in the hopes that I'll find somewhere that's basically a worst case scenario, and I think we have the spot. So if you look around, we're basically in the middle of a valley. So this one could be potentially the true test. Right, so again we've got the 5G Lebara SIM in this phone, and as you can see, there's literally no signal at all, no data. Let's press go on a speed test. I suspect we'll just get an error. Yeah, it's not even managed to find the provider. Yep, error straight away. So this is the kind of scenario I was describing at the start of the video, and this is the one that really matters to me. Can it take us from no signal at all inside the van to a usable signal? Let's find out. Right, so this one for me is the moment of truth. Connected to the Wi-Fi, the SIM card is in the router. Let's see if it can give us anything better than no connection at all. Okay. So it's certainly not fast, but that's plenty to browse the internet, send a message, maybe even stream at low quality. And if I didn't have this antenna, I'd literally have no internet connection at all. I'd be completely cut off. So as low as that speed is, I'm actually really pleased with that, because this was the problem I was hoping to solve. Right, so that's all the testing done. I guess it's time for me to give my final thoughts. So in terms of installation, it was relatively straightforward. Most of the time was spent just scoping out, planning where to install it, where was the best place. But once we actually got going, it wasn't too difficult. It's now been on the van for a couple of weeks. It's rained quite heavily since then. I've not had any leaks, which is always a good sign. In terms of performance, obviously testing with the 4G only SIM, so lesson learned there, this isn't a 5G SIM. Bit of a mixed bag really. So in some scenarios we got a slightly better download speed on the router, but mostly the performance was actually better just using my mobile phone. Although what I will say is during those tests we're in areas where the signal was relatively good, so I wouldn't actually be tempted to use the antenna on the roof. I'd just be using my phone in that situation. When we switched over to the 5G SIM card, we did see a big difference there. Obviously it's on a different network, so different test conditions, but the one that I really cared about was that last test where there was just no signal, or I just couldn't use my phone, couldn't send a message, couldn't do anything. And then plugging into the same SIM card into the router in the van gave me a half decent speed. You know, it went up to around 5 megabytes, so you could be doing some browsing on that or sending a message. I don't like being completely cut off. I do like the great outdoors, but when I settle down at the end of the day in the van and I just want to chill and plan the next day, go online, do a bit of browsing. So for me, I would say it has been worth it. It's been fun installing it and testing it. I've enjoyed making this video. If you found any of this useful, I'd really appreciate a like, and if you could subscribe as well, that'd be great. I'm really close to 1,000 subs now, so thanks to everybody that has subscribed. Any questions or comments, just feel free to leave them below, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.